The philosopher, thinker, writer Karl Marx had an idea about wealth and what happens to the relationship between wealth and work. One of his main arguments was that the pursuit of wealth in the Industrial Revolution, as he saw it, was causing people to be separated from their work or alienated from it in an unhealthy way that was leading to them being degraded as humans. And indeed, the owners, the sort of merchant class who were in charge of the factories, that they were becoming alienated from other people and the other workers because of this. Now, I want to put up front and saying that doesn't mean I'm a Marxist. I am just noting that he did have some good insight into some of the problems that were caused by the system that was starting to come on stream. We might not agree, or might agree or disagree with his solutions to those problems, but what we find in Ecclesiastes chapter 8 is that that was actually a much more ancient problem than just the Industrial Revolution, because it's something that revolves around the question of what are we here for? Are we put on this earth just to work and to spin away, to make as much money as we can, either for ourselves or for other people, and then it's all over and we go in the box and that's the end of it? Or is there a whole other purpose to life? And if there is another purpose to life, how does that affect our relationship to work and to money and to making money through work and so on? Humans have been trying to work that out for a long, long time. And the preacher in Ecclesiastes has an amazing perspective on that. Now, I don't know if you've ever read Ecclesiastes through or tried to. Maybe you gave up quite near the start. It is a mysterious book. It's an enigmatic and complicated book. It's one of my favorite books of the Bible, probably for that reason. You can never get a handle on it. And I do hope to maybe go through and teach through it at some point. But there's this main voice in it that we keep hearing from, called the teacher or the preacher. Now, he is one in the Hebrew who just gathers people to listen to his sayings. And that's where we get the name Ecclesiastes from, because ecclesia in the New Testament in Greek is just a gathering of people. That's why it's called that. So you've got this preacher who gathers people and who gathers sayings. Now, why does he do that? What's the mission of the book? Well, Ecclesiastes sits, and this is all necessary to make sense of anything in Ecclesiastes, is to understand where it sits in the grand scheme of things. It's part of the Old Testament, the wisdom books. Now, the wisdom books are trying to figure out what's the good life, how do you live a good life, and what's the point of living a good life. And it comes just after Proverbs. And for Jewish people in the ancient world, Jewish people today, and for Christians today, we recognize that it's very different from Proverbs. You see, Proverbs is full of nice, small, short sayings, aphorisms, if you like, that gauge the relationship between doing the right thing or working hard in life and getting a good outcome. Now, they are proverbs, they're not promises, and Ecclesiastes then comes as the counterbalance to that. Because as you and I know, excuse me, how many of you have been in a situation where you have either worked hard, or you have done the right thing, or you've done something to your cost because you had integrity and it was the right thing to do, and you paid a price for it? Or how many of you are familiar from watching the news, if you watch the news at all, and you see people who definitely do not do the right thing, have no interest in doing the right thing, and they do quite well in life? They have massive houses all over the world. So if you take Proverbs and you go, oh, right, okay, great, that's the way life is supposed to work, you're in for a really, really big disappointment. And Ecclesiastes comes to say, actually, it's more complicated than that. There are times when those proverbs don't work out, and it's to give space and opportunity to work through, okay, well, what does that mean about humanity and God in those times when things don't work out? And the preacher uses this word to reinforce it again and again. In the passage that Lorna read for us, she used this word. It depends what translation you're reading. But some, it'll say that there's something that there is meaningless. Some will say futility or futile. Some will say vanity. All is vanity. That's the King James Version that some of us would have grown up with. It's a really mysterious word in itself, but it's got this idea of that life is a bit like a vapor. It comes and it goes, and it's really hard to grasp. It's very difficult to attach meaning to it. You cannot see or understand it fully from this perspective. And the preacher continually says, life is vanity, meaningless, futile, under the sun, because of these things that happen. You know, the guy who rips everyone off seems to do really well, and it never catches up with him, or whatever. Well, that does give life a kind of feeling of futility if you're on the receiving end of that. And he's looking at things and he's testing it. The preacher's kind of doing a live experiment with life. If you read through the whole book, you'll see that he starts out by saying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the Proverbs from the last book to the test, and I'm going to see if when I survey and I look out on the world around me, does it actually work out according to these Proverbs and maxims? And it doesn't seem to at all. And that's why he comes to this conclusion. Life under the sun, and by that he means if this is all there is, this world, then there's a lot of alienation. There's a lot of injustice. There's a lot of gaps in the system where things don't work out well or properly. And he meditates on that and forces us to meditate on it and ask, well, what do we do with that? Now, in our passage, he firstly considers the problem of poverty. You see the poor being oppressed in a district, and then there's this mountain of bureaucracy on top of them, meaning that they can't really seem to get justice. And my goodness, if that isn't a proverb for all times, how many of you know people or have come across people, or perhaps yourselves have been in a system where you're trying to maybe get through to the benefits system, or you know people that are, and they're completely almost oppressed by the layers of bureaucracy that have to be gone through in order to access the basic needs and means of survival. And that continues. And so you can see the preacher from verse 9 into verse 10 going, okay, well, poverty's terrible if that's your lot. That doesn't work out well. And then you can see him anticipating the next thought by going, well, surely the answer is to try and be as not poor as possible. Surely the answer is to try and go after wealth, to try and make sure this doesn't happen to you, that you don't fall to the bottom of the pile of society and life under a mountain of dysfunctional bureaucracy that's designed to keep you there. Surely you should do everything in your power to run from that. And he says, not so fast. And this is what I want to think about in terms of wealth from verse 10 onwards. In verse 10 to 17, there are 5 ways that he says that the love or the pursuit of wealth for its own sake are completely futile. And some of them may be obvious, but some of them may surprise you, the depth to which he goes into as to why these things are futile. So I want to think about those 5 things, and they are, because there's 5, they're much shorter than my usual 3 points, so don't worry, we won't be here all day. And then there's a really nice turn at verse 18, where he observes what is actually good and where you can actually find some meaning in life. And that's going to be relevant to our celebrating the sacrament today. So the 5 problems. Well, the first one in verse 10, whoever loves money never has enough, and whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. And this too is meaningless, futile, pointless, a vapor. The first way that he sees that chasing wealth is futile is that it is a bottomless pit. It is impossible for it to bring satisfaction. Now, I think we can probably all chunk up to see that this is true at the highest level. We all know what it's like to see, the Forbes 50 richest list, your Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and all these guys, and they never stop. They keep building their empires up and up and up and up and up. And there's some research being done on why somebody who started as an entrepreneur does that. It's because they can't ever rest with the fact that whatever they earned and they managed, that could be insecure at any moment. And so they need to keep adding to it because they're aware of how the first chunk that they did might slip away. But for all of us, that's probably never, I don't think any of us are ever going to be billionaires, so that's probably not very relevant. So, okay, so they're never satisfied. But are we never satisfied? Can we avoid this chasing the bottomless pit? I was reading a book in the last few weeks by a guy called Yuval Harari, and he's a brilliant thinker, and he's written a book basically on the history of humanity called Sapiens. It's a really good read. But he was showing that from what we know from anthropology, from studying humans, that sometimes more money is the answer, but a lot of the time it is not. Now, let me explain what he means by that. There is a lot of difference between someone who is living a subsistence lifestyle, say in sub-Saharan Africa, and there are some NGOs that are doing this kind of thing just now. If they get a cash injection of 500 to 1,000 British pounds, and they've been living on less than, say, £2 a day, that will change their lives. They will be able to perhaps buy some provision in terms of animals. They'll then be able to maybe start some kind of business for themselves. They'll be able to be self-sufficient. They'll be able to meet their basic human needs. And that, it seems, psychologically, is where human satisfaction lies, is being able to do those things. The satisfaction indicators, when people are studied, say somebody is earning £250,000, and that's their salary, and they get bumped up on a huge promotion, and say they add to their wealth by either £100,000 or even double it, that buzz, satisfaction, gain, it only lasts psychologically a few weeks, and then it disappears. Because we are designed that when our basic needs are met, everything else is quite honestly a bonus. Now, you and I don't live in a culture where that is obvious or the case. You and I live in a culture where we are continually force-fed the message through advertising and everything else that if you could just get this next thing, you don't need it, but if you could get it, you would actually possibly be happy and satisfied. And how many of us have got the t-shirt from this? We got the thing, and then a few weeks later, there was something else that we quite fancied. And we thought, okay, well, maybe the next time, once your basic needs are met, and from whether it's on a small scale, from us with shopping, or up to billionaires, or that is a timeless human principle, that the chasing of things and wealth and material, divorced from any other reason, are impossible to satisfy. It is a hungry beast that can never, ever, ever be filled. And then it's futile in verse 11. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? It's futile chasing wealth because there's lots of hidden costs to it. Yes, there's the bigger balance sheet, but there's a lot of other detraction. Now, the ancient world was much more communal and was probably agrarian, so the picture here is of someone who's added to their wealth probably by bigger stores of grain and so on. But there was very much a societal expectation that the benefits and rewards of that would be meted out within certainly their family and their community. So this is picturing someone who they've done that, they've chased it, they've succeeded, but they're not really able to enjoy it the way they might have wanted or thought they would. Now that doesn't carry over so much to our culture, because our culture is highly individualistic, where you can live what used to be called the American dream, or you could, where you became wealthy independently on the back of your own work and success. Allegedly, we all exist in an ecosystem that helps us, but then you can enjoy and reap the rewards of that and keep them to yourself. Now, that's not necessarily a solution, but there's other problems that are going to increase. With greater wealth comes the need to secure it, comes the need to lie awake at night and worry if it's secure, if whatever you're paying in terms of insurance or security is going to be enough. It's going to be the hangers-on. You know, the people who they might win the lottery, and there was famously someone who came on in complete disguise when they did the press because they didn't want all the moochers starting to come around once they came into some wealth. It doesn't actually, in and of itself, solve a lot of our problems of, well, how do we relate to other people? How do we find meaning and fulfillment? It adds to the burden and the increase. Often then detracts from mental and physical health. There are countless stories of people, especially in our culture, who, because of trying to engage in this and constantly chase more, they've sacrificed everything, including their health, mentally and physically, and even often their own families and relationships. And the other problem is it's futile because it means that sleep disappears or eludes them. There's that lovely verse in Psalm 127. The Lord grants sleep to those whom he loves. It's a nice theological tie between doing honest and fulfilling and work that has some integrity to it and being able to rest appropriately and start again the next day. We're made for that. And both the Bible and biological studies would attest to that's really when we function best, when we're able to do that. Now, there's a really nice picture that the preacher gives us in verse 12. The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much, but as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. And so he's doing a kind of thought experiment where he's asking you, who is actually richer here? Who actually has it better? You might say the what we would call the working class person, or in this society, the day laborer. They don't have a lot. They might not have the fullest stomach, but they're able to rest. And rest is important for everything, our physiology, but it's also a spiritual gift from God. It's one of the most, we cannot survive without rest. And people who can't rest or don't rest become very unwell. And it puts people in a grave because rest is essential. And the person with all the wealth, they can't rest, either because they're addicted to the cycle of trying to increase more, or because they are given so much anxiety, or because they have now begun to see so much of their identity in this balance sheet and the wealth that they have. And so they're always worried about whether that's going to slip away, because the thing that is no different between the very wealthy person in the story and the laborer is that they both are humans who care about their identity. And then he goes on to another, it's just one blow after another in terms of the futility of this. From verse 13 and 14 is that cannot stop it slipping away. There's absolutely no control over the forces that'll keep it with him or not. I've seen another grievous evil. And this one, actually, the language he uses means it's made him quite sick to watch because it's so tragic. Wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there's nothing left for them to inherit. The difficulty with our culture and the system of insurance and relative security and all of that is it gives the illusion of control. Now, the preacher elsewhere in Ecclesiastes has this devastating phrase that cuts into all of this. He says, time, chance, and death happen to all men and women equally, regardless of what they have in the bank or what they've done in life or who they are. All of those things. Time, chance, and death. And he is warning here against the illusion that just because it's there and you got it, and just because it's been there a long time, or just because you've lived in a society and culture that's given enough relative stability for you to think it'll be there forever, that's not a guarantee. Everything that you have, and he's starting to, can you see how he's starting to edge you towards the conclusion, my goodness, maybe we aren't sovereign. Maybe we don't really have that much control. Maybe there is something else and far more. Maybe if this is it, and in this life, and you've got to just try and run as fast as you can and work as hard as you can and make as much as you can. But if you could do that, and it's basically a cosmic game of snakes and ladders, and you could get to the very top and draw the big snake and end up all the way back down at the bottom, and there's no way to know if that's going to happen or not. That sounds like a terrible setup for life. So what's the point if that's the case? Worse than that, this is the last one and this is the worst one, I promise. This also is a grievous evil. Riches are futile because the chasing of them leads to death. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain since they toil for the wind all their days? They eat in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. Here's what the preacher has observed, is he's seen this person try desperately to chase and run after wealth and to build it up, but it's been a very solitary exercise. It's poetic language about them eating in darkness, which means that they're alone in it. At what cost? They've done this because they thought it would bring them happiness and satisfactions, but it's pushed everyone away, and they're alone in darkness. And they are edging ever closer to death, and then when they do pass through the final shadow of death, they're going to find that everything that they thought life was about, whether that was possessions or just looking at a balance sheet that was very healthy, whatever that was in terms of their enterprise of chasing wealth, that it's not going to go with them, that it's going to be impossible for it to go with them, and it's not going to be of any comfort to them when they come to that day. And not only that, but in the present, it's given them nothing but, as Michael Scott said, more money, more problems. That's all it's done. And he's asking, so what was the point in that? What an awfully dark and gloomy and horrible picture of life, if that is all it is about. I hope that the preacher has convinced you that chasing wealth and riches is just the worst of all possible existences. But in contrast, then he says in verse 18, this is what I have observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life that God has given them, for this is their lot. For when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them and be happy, this is a gift from God. So, here is the distinction, and here's kind of the two voices in Ecclesiastes. One looks at life under the sun as if that's all there is. And it's dark, and it's gloomy, and it's pointless, and often it's meaningless, and it's hard to extract much meaning from it if that's all there is. And if you push someone who has that worldview and push it all the way to the bottom and say, well, what do you believe in, and what's the point? If they think this is all there is, they'll eventually get to this bottom and go, well, I don't know much further beyond that. But when the preacher brings God into the picture, can you notice how it changes the tone of the passage, and indeed by extension changes the tone of life? He's saying there is some good in it. And did you notice how he didn't say wealth or money or riches or any of that in itself is inherently evil? The New Testament passage, which Lorna read for us today, is always misquoted as if money is evil or wealth is evil. The love or the chasing of it or the making it an idol of a god is evil and leads to the degradation and the alienation of one's soul from God and from others. But the ability to enjoy that, see how expansive this is? To eat and drink and find satisfaction in their toilsome labor, so that's our laborer person, or someone who has wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them. Both are a gift from God. Now, what's the implication? You and I can't control any of the large-scale macro factors that will determine where we will end up on that scale. From this point of view, in this life and this earth, we are the same as the preacher. We cannot see behind the veil. We do not know why God does what he does, and we do not know why some people are poor and some people are rich, and why we have our lot in life. And Ecclesiastes is there to show you it's okay that you don't know the answers to those things. And it's actually often a fool's errand to try and assume a God-like perspective and give answers to that, because you don't know. But what is important, and what you can know and what can make the difference is you can be connected to the God who gave that life, and that will change your perspective on things, and that will actually redeem to a point your situation, whether you don't have much or whether you have a lot. Neither of those experiences are actually much of a life. disconnected from God the Creator and from others. And that's the point. What did Jesus say is the greatest commandment? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and to love others as yourself. And what the love of and the chasing of wealth and money for its own sake does is it eats away at those God-given, not only commandments, they're not just commandments, they are keys for flourishing in this life and indeed the next. And he's saying, whether you're wealthy or you're poor or you're somewhere in between, which is probably where most of us in the West are today, although by historical standards we're quite wealthy, it's living life, as the Reformer said, before the face of God. There is something beyond the sun. There is the face of God who gave and created that sun. And life just underneath its scorching heat for its own sake is not much of a life. But life before the face of God, it's very different. It has the light of God in oneself and in one's soul. And that means that whatever your Lord, you're able to actually enjoy it and receive it and be thankful for it and actually have gratitude for the bits of enjoyment that come along in life and be satisfied and occupied with that, rather than constantly in the future and anxious about either what is going to happen or could have happened in terms of our wealth and possessions and so on. More than that, this is actually the source of celebration in life. That it's appropriate for a person to eat, drink, and find satisfaction under the sun and before God. For the preacher's original audience, when they saw eat, drink, and enjoy, it was always associated with celebration, and was almost always associated with religious celebration and with feast times. And that would have rung a bell to his readers and his audience to think, oh, this is about enjoying the rituals and the patterns that God has given us that actually connect us to Him. Now, if the problem, as Marx identified, is that the systems of our life and of our world often disconnect and alienate us from each other and from God, what's the answer? To eat and drink and commune and celebrate the fact that God has made a way for us